What if I told you that one of history's most famous kings was essentially a serial killer with a crown? A man so paranoid, he tasted his food for poison, so violent that his own courtiers fled in terror, and so grotesque in death that his rotting corpse literally exploded during his funeral. Welcome to the real Henry VIII. Not the jolly, wife-collecting monarch you learned about in school, but a psychopathic tyrant whose reign was soaked in blood, paranoia, and horror that would make modern dictators blush with envy. Forget everything you think you know about Henry VIII. Hollywood has been selling you a sanitized fairy tale about a lovable rogue who just wanted a son. The truth? Henry wasn't a romantic figure. He was a walking nightmare who turned marriage into a death sentence and transformed his court into a torture chamber disguised as a palace. Today we're diving into the blood-soaked reality of England's most terrifying monarch. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll never look at a Tudor rose the same way again. Let's start with a simple question. How many husbands do you know who've executed 2 of their wives? If your answer is anything other than 0, you might want to reconsider your social circle. Henry VIII didn't just have marital problems, he had a pathological need to destroy anyone who disappointed him. But here's what's truly chilling. He didn't just kill his wives in fits of rage. No. This was calculated, methodical psychological torture followed by public execution. He turned marriage into the ultimate game of Russian roulette, where 6 women pulled the trigger and 2 got the bullet. Anne Boleyn, his second wife, went from being the love of his life to losing her head in less than 3 years. Why? Because she had the audacity to give birth to a daughter instead of a son. Imagine being so entitled that you blame your wife for basic biology and then have her executed for adultery. Charges so ridiculous that even his own courtiers knew they were fabricated. But wait, it gets worse. Catherine Howard, wife number 5, was barely out of her teens when Henry became obsessed with her youth and beauty. This grown man, by then a bloated, stinking mass of paranoia and rage, manipulated a naive girl into marriage, then had her beheaded when her past caught up with her. The age gap alone would raise eyebrows today, but in Henry's world, it was just Tuesday. Now, let's talk about what karma looks like when it's served with a side of medieval medicine. Remember that athletic young king who used to joust and hunt? By the end of his life, Henry VIII had transformed into something that would make zombie movie directors weep with inspiration. Picture this. A man so obese he had to be hoisted onto his horse with a mechanical crane. Yes, you heard that right. A crane. The same king who once impressed European courts with his physical prowess now needed construction equipment just to mount his horse. But that's not even the worst part. Those legendary leg ulcers. They weren't just wounds. They were festering, rotting holes in his flesh that never healed. And the smell was so horrific that courtiers would literally gag when entering his presence. We're talking about odors so foul that people who lived in an era before deodorant and regular bathing found them unbearable. Imagine the stench that could offend a medieval nose. The pus, the decay, the constant oozing. Henry became a walking advertisement for why absolute power and zero self-control don't mix. His own body became his prison, and everyone around him became unwilling inmates in his nightmare of physical decline. But here's the question that should keep you up at night. If this is what happened to his body, what do you think was happening to his mind? Let's dive into Henry's relationship with food, because nothing says stable monarch like paranoid eating disorders combined with medieval gluttony. This man didn't just eat, he performed elaborate rituals around food that would make a modern cult leader jealous. Henry's feasts weren't meals, they were theatrical productions of excess. We're talking about banquets featuring roasted swan, peacock, and yes, porpoise. Because apparently, regular animals weren't exotic enough for a king slowly losing his grip on reality. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Every single meal was a potential assassination attempt in his paranoid mind. Food tasters weren't just precautions. They were human sacrifices, waiting to happen. Imagine being the person whose job description was literally, eat the king's food first and hope you don't die. These weren't volunteers. These were terrified servants who knew that one bad bite could mean their last breath. And the protocols? Absolutely insane. Dishes were presented with the ceremony of a coronation, every utensil was inspected, and the king would watch his tasters' faces for signs of poison before taking a single bite. Dinner wasn't dining. It was a daily reminder that everyone wanted him dead. And honestly, can you blame them? But here's the twisted part. While he was paranoid about being poisoned, he was literally poisoning himself with gluttony. The irony would be hilarious if it weren't so pathetic. Now, let's talk about what it was actually like to work for Henry VIII. Imagine your worst boss, multiply their terrifying qualities by 1,000, then give them the legal right to execute you on a whim. Welcome to Tudor employment. Henry's paranoia didn't just affect his eating habits, it turned his entire court into a psychological horror show. Courtiers lived in constant terror, never knowing if a wrong word, a misinterpreted glance, or even a rumor could land them on the chopping block. This wasn't just job insecurity. This was literally life or death customer service. The atmosphere was so toxic that friendships became strategic alliances, and family dinners turned into political minefields. People stopped speaking freely, stopped trusting each other, and started living like they were in a perpetual spy thriller. Except the stakes weren't just careers, they were lives. But here's the most disturbing part. Henry's paranoia was so extreme that he began to suspect his own children. Yes, you read that right. This man was so consumed by fear that he viewed his daughters Mary and Elizabeth as potential threats to his throne. What kind of father looks at his own children and sees assassins? The answer is simple. The kind of father who shouldn't have been trusted with a goldfish, let alone a kingdom. And now, for the grand finale, Henry's death and burial, which managed to be even more horrifying than his life. When Henry VIII died in 1547, his body had become a testament to medieval excess gone wrong. We're talking about a corpse so bloated and decomposed that it was literally falling apart. But wait, it gets worse. During his funeral procession, yes, during the actual funeral, Henry's body began to, let's say, leak. The combination of his obesity, the infections, and the crude, embalming techniques of the era created a biological disaster that would make modern morticians flee in terror. The procession that was supposed to be a grand tribute to a mighty king instead became a chaotic nightmare of courtiers trying to maintain dignity while dealing with the reality of their decomposing monarch. The irony is almost poetic. A man who spent his life obsessing over appearances ended up as a rotting spectacle that horrified everyone who witnessed it. And here's the final insult. Dogs reportedly licked up what leaked from his coffin. The same man who once commanded armies and struck fear into the hearts of nations ended up as, well, let's just say, it wasn't the legacy he had in mind. So, what's the takeaway from this tale of royal horror? Henry VIII wasn't just a bad king, he was a cautionary tale about what happens when unlimited power meets unchecked mental illness. Every decision he made was filtered through paranoia, rage, and an ego so fragile that disagreement meant death. His wives weren't just casualties of his quest for a male heir. They were victims of systematic psychological abuse by a man who treated marriage like a disposable commodity. His court wasn't just dysfunctional, it was a terrorized population, living under the rule of a madman with a crown. But here's the question that should haunt us. How many other historical heroes were actually monsters whose stories have been sanitized by time and propaganda? How many other kings and queens hide similar horrors behind their romantic legends? The next time someone mentions Henry VIII, don't think of the charming monarch from your history textbook. Think of the paranoid tyrant who turned marriage into murder, food into fear, and his own court into a living nightmare. Think of the man whose body literally fell apart from his own excesses, whose death was as grotesque as his life, and whose reign left a trail of trauma that echoed through generations. Henry VIII wasn't just England's most infamous king, he was proof that absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it creates monsters. And the most terrifying part? He's remembered as one of the great monarchs of history. What does that say about how we define greatness?